Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a weekly reads video which I want to say is for two books of non-fiction. In the case of one of them, that's debatable. So I read Reality Hunger by David Shields, which is a reread for me, and Lost in Math, How Beauty Leads Physics Astray by Sabine Hossenfelder. I'm going to start with the David Shields. So when I first read this, I thought it was a book of sort of epigrams about the novel, memoir, fiction versus reality, all those sorts of things, which was very provocative, had some things I absolutely agreed with and some things I absolutely didn't agree with. So just to give you a couple of examples of those. Art is not truth. Art is a lie that enables us to recognise truth. I agree that art is not truth. I don't agree that art is a lie that enables us to recognise truth. I think that art is a lie that enables us to recognise lies upon which all of our reality is founded. Or another one. I want books to be equal to the complexity of experience, memory and thought, not flattening it out with either linear narrative, as in the traditional novel, or smooth recount, as in the standard memoir. So there were lots of things to say in here. First time around that I gave me pause for thought. Some I agreed with, some I virulently disagreed with. He sort of proclaims the novel is dead, or on its last legs. Obviously, as a novelist, I cavilled at that. I did like what he had to say about memoir, which is essentially fiction, because the selection and arrangement of events in one's life, though based on those are based on fact, but that actual act of selection and arrangement is what a novelist does through their imagination. It doesn't make it didn't happen like that, and it certainly wasn't arranged in that order. And even if chronologically it's in order, what about all the bits that are missed out in between? That could colour, some of those events. So, as I say, there were bits I agreed with and bits I didn't agree. I read it this time round, and I read it having read David Markson's book, This Is Not a Novel. And I realised that this book is very much in the same field as David Markson's book. That actually this is a coherent book in terms of the argument that it's making. Shields is asking himself is what type of writer does he want to be? And he comes up with the notion that he wants to be a lyrical essayist, and I'll come to what he means by that. But the whole book is probing and trying to refine and get to the hub of what that means, and is there any value in that? And what I also didn't really sort of register last time round is that a lot of because it is epigrammatic and each one is numbered. What I didn't realise last time round was actually a lot of these are culled from other people's sayings and writings, and he does list in the back where each one comes from, and that's very sort of like Markson, that sort of quoting thing. Here Shields is doing it as a sort of an act of sort of artistic plagiarism, in order to build up the self of David Shields, and I suddenly realised to say that this is very Marksonian, if that's a word, and I appreciated it all the more. And as I say, it is coherent. The whole book does come together behind a path towards an argument, which I hadn't picked up first time round. So to give you some I think more pertinent bits of quotes. I like to write stuff that's only an inch from life, from what really happened, but all the art is, of course, in that inch. My books tend not to have the narrative and story you associate with fiction, but at the same time they are arranged and structured, to put it somewhat pompously, as works of art rather than accumulations of information. To that extent, I like to think that they are more novel than many novels. Speaking about oneself is not necessarily offensive. A modest, truthful man speaks better about himself than about anything else, and on that subject his speech is likely to be the most profitable to his hearers. If he be without taint to boastfulness, of self-sufficiency, of hungry vanity, the world will not press the charge home. It is this egotism, this perpetual reference to self, in which the charm of the essayist resides. If a man is worth knowing at all, he is worth knowing well. So this is rooted in his argument that, you know, there's a desperate craving for sort of reality, that we're sort of plagued by a surfeit of hyper-reality, of mediated reality through film, TV, music, etc., the internet, etc., etc., etc. Shields acknowledges that to write about oneself, be it in memoir or fiction, is not the best way to approach that in a useful manner. He likes the notion of an essay, of an essayist, because the word essay comes from the French to try. You know, that you're not going to be able to sort of perfectly sort of dovetail with reality, but you can do your best to hit that stream. And, you know, he talks about sort of the problem of reality, such as reality TV shows, so that the person, apart from the fact they're probably structured and half scripted anyway, but the person sat at home is watching someone else's real life and how that impacts on their real life, and the fact that they may have control over the person on TV's real life because they can vote to get rid of them from a talent show or whatever. And the fact that the internet, so that potentially everyone now has their own TV channel, of which the subject is themselves, be it Instagram or Facebook or, you know, YouTube, posting videos and all that kind of stuff. So that is very much the context in which he's rooting it, which is why it's called reality hunger. And I'm just going to finish by reading a series from one chapter. The world exists. Why recreate it? I want to think about it, try to understand it. What I am is a wisdom junkie, knowing all along that wisdom is in many ways junk. I want a literature built entirely out of contemplation and revelation. Who cares about anything else? And the next epigram. The only end of writing is to enable the reader better to enjoy life or better to endure it. So goeth the Samuel Johnson dictum. I most admire those books that not only enable me to endure life, but to show me how they got there. Serious plumbing of consciousness, not flashing of narrative legerdemain, helps me understand another human being. The former is boring in a good sense, the latter is boring in a bad sense. And on to some more from this chapter. Life consists in what man is thinking of all day. The essayist gives you his thoughts and lets you know, in addition, how he came by them. The glory of the essayist is to tell once and for all everything that he or she thinks, knows and understands. Serious writing actually tries to get somewhere, to make intellectual, emotional, psychic and philosophical progress. This progress could, of course, also be regress. Obviously, with some very accomplished novelists, one feels this via magisterial storytelling. Actually, I can think of very few at the moment. But in the work of my favourite writers, the armature of overt drama is dispensed with, and we're left with a deeper drama, the real drama, an active human consciousness trying to figure out how he or she has solved or not solved being alive. And the final selection. What the lyric essay gives you, what fiction doesn't usually, is the freedom to emphasise its aboutness, its metaphysical meaningfulness. There's plenty of drama, but it's subservient to the larger drama of mind. Maybe the essay really is just a philosophical investigation. Maybe, because it's masked by other forms such as story or memoir or lyric or fable, we ignore its most basic form. The motor of fiction is narrative, the motor of essay is thought. The default of fiction is storytelling, the default of essay is memoir. Fiction, no ideas but in things. Serious essay, not the thing itself but ideas about the thing. Someone once said to me, quoting someone or other, discursive thought is not fiction's most efficient tool. The interaction of characters is everything. This is when I knew I wasn't a fiction writer, because discursive thought is what I read and write for. So, overall, my opinions of the individual epigrams hasn't really changed from when I read it first time round, but I'm much more appreciative now that this is a inquiry by David Shields into what sort of writing he should pursue, which I hadn't clocked the first time at all. And he says things like characters get in the way of ideas, plots get in the way of ideas within novels. And I very much feel that, I'm not that interested in either character or plot in my novels. I am interested in language and, perceptions of reality and how that rubs up against through the membrane of language and how human beings think. I'm very much in Shields' camp, though I'm not I would never see myself as wanting to be a lyrical essayist like he does, but we're approaching our goals, which are very similar, from different artistic means. And I really appreciated this. And last time around I gave it 4 stars. This time around I give it 5 stars. For that cohesiveness and coherence that I missed first time round. Now on to Lost in Mass by Sabine Hossenfelder, who is a German academic, a physicist. I had hoped that she'd written this in German, it was translated, and I could count it for my Read More German lit. But what you forget, of course, is that the world of science is totally colonised by the English language. That no matter what part of the world you're from, your papers and everything will almost certainly have to be in English. So this is in English. And it sort of posits, it starts off really as, it's very iconoclastic, and I always like an iconoclast because that's how I view myself. But it's actually it's not quite so much an iconoclast as someone who's having a crisis of faith, her faith being in the verities of physics and science. And she goes around talking to lots of cutting-edge scientists, particularly in the particle physics world, and challenges them all on the assumptions that they've built into their work. And I would say that there are 1 or 2 bits, small bits, where my eyes glazed over at the physics, but on the whole this is really accessible. And those bits that my eyes skimmed over, it didn't matter that I didn't grasp the physics at all. They were used illustratively rather than you needed to know the knowledge in order to move on to the next idea. So her point is that the history of scientific discussion, of scientific discovery, has been dominated by key scientific laws, and many of which are beautiful in that they are elegant, simple, economical, symmetrical, they provide unities, all these sorts of value judgments. So if you take, for example, Einstein's E equals mc squared, well, c squared will always be the same because c is a constant. It is the speed limit of light, the speed that light travels through the universe, and squared is just a factorial, so that never changes. So you only need to find out one of the other 2 components, E being energy or m being mass, in order to be able to calculate the other factor. This is a wonderfully elegant, simple, stripped down equation, and scientists regard that as inherently beautiful. But they extrapolate out from that and other key equations that all science, all physical laws, all of nature is governed by such beautiful laws. And this is what Hossenfelder is, she's taking to task throughout this book, that just because physics has relied on such beauty and elegance doesn't mean it will in the future, because we've reached a stage now where, in a way, physics is beginning to sort of fray at the edges, in that it has become so hard to design experiments to test all these weird and wonderful theories at the quantum level or at the planetary level, the cosmological level. So if you think about the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, multi-billion-dollar experiment to prove the existence of the Higgs boson particle, which it did, but there are problems with the results it delivered. The Higgs boson denied some of the predictions that were made for it. And also it was assumed that other particles would be discovered to back up the theory of supersymmetry, and the clues in the title, symmetry, which is a theory that of all the 26 existing subatomic particles, they're each paired with their sort of obverse. So there should be another 26 or 25, because I think the Higgs is probably one, inverted versions of them, and none of them have been found. In that sense, the LHC has been a failure, or it's not been a failure, but then the theory of supersymmetry would have to be abandoned, which it isn't, because there's a lot of scientists clinging tenaciously on it because their tenures depend on it, kind of thing. So doing experiments is really, really expensive and difficult, and that has led to two quite alarming streams within science. One is the tentative suggestion that the empirical, experimental, observational method is loosened, which means that, well, how does science therefore distinguish itself from maths and philosophy, which are both products of mental thought but never have to be backed up through experiment and observation? So that's the first sort of fraying of the edge. And the second one is something that I've always struggled with and found difficult, in that each new discovery in science, from Newton to Einstein, they look like paradigmatic shifts, whole new bodies of knowledge, but actually no, because they have to encompass the existing things that have been proved by scientific experiment and observation. So what they do is they resolve the problems of the previous state of knowledge and theories. So they build on it. They don't, they are not revolutionary paradigmatic shifts at all. And I never quite understood why that is. It's because we have all these previous experiments that have all this data that proves the theory. They can't just be junked unless you're going to radically overhaul your theories entirely. So, for example, Einstein's theory relies on there being nothing faster than the speed of light. Well, what happens if we discover something that is faster than the speed of light? It would junk and revolutionise Einstein and have to overthrow his whole body of theory. But that doesn't happen in science, because there's an inherent conservatism rather than the sort of move for paradigmatic shifts. And that conservatism is because it always comes back to this notion of elegance, simplicity and beauty. And a second knock-on of that is, because you can't do all these experiments for all the theories that are in the world at the moment, you have to pick and choose, because it takes a long time, a lot of money and development to build an LHC, for example. And so if you have two theories about looking at the same thing, but one is much more elegant and simple than the other, that's going to be more likely to get the funding than the other. But there's no inherent we don't know that nature is symmetrical and beautiful and economical, and all these are aesthetic terms, not scientific terms. They're philosophical terms, they're not scientific terms. And even if your equation is simple and elegant, the result it gives may not be. And that what is called a natural outcome in science is a result of an equation where the answer is as near to the number 1 as possible. That is viewed as natural. And if you get too big over 1 or too small under 1, that's when the physicists have to start sort of glomming on adjustments to their thinking, which is called fine-tuning, which is very ironic because it's not fine-tuning at all, particularly in the case of sort of huge numbers. So there are all sorts of problems in having this sort of teleological drive of any search for new laws or explanation of existing laws, where there are problems, being driven by, well, the solution must be beautiful, must be elegant, must be simple, must involve unifying various factors. And she takes these to task. Before I give you some examples of this, I just want to read the chapter headings, or some of the chapter headings, because she's quite what we call chippy in the UK. So, chapter 4, Cracks in the Foundations, in which I meet with Nima Arkhani Hamed and do my best to accept that nature isn't natural, everything we learn is awesome, and that nobody gives a fuck what I think. Chapter 5, Ideal Theories, in which I search for the end of science, but find that the imagination of theoretical physicists is endless. I fly to Austin, let Steven Weinberg talk at me, and realise how much we do just to avoid boredom. Chapter 6, The Incomprehensible Comprehensibility of Quantum Mechanics, in which I ponder the difference between math and magic, and so on. So, I love her tone, I love her sort of self-doubt about, her own essential core as a physicist. It's terrific. Just coming back to that notion of why I could never understand why new scientific theories didn't junk the old ones. Why Newtonian mechanics is still taught in schools. I mean, I was taught that. It's because it works as an approximation of reality, and it works, and this is the absolute key point for me as a layman and as a novelist. It works as an approximation of reality for us on our human scale and how our perception works. That the two scales either side, one is the sort of cosmic scale of planetary behaviour, and Einstein, theory of the relativity of time only operates at that level, where the observer is almost moving at the maximum speed in the universe, which is the moving at the speed of light, or just under it, which of course never happens in our daily lives. So none of the behaviour or the natural laws around that apply to our daily lives. And equally on the quantum scale, which only relates to the behaviour of sort of subatomic particles, and the strangeness of quantum behaviour, where you can't measure the speed and the position of something. Again, that doesn't apply to our daily lives because it's at too small a scale. Now you can feed that into the development of quantum computers, which help us do all sorts of calculations which will improve our daily lives, in theory. But in terms of our level, our dimensionality, our perception, and how our brains are sort of wired to perceive and think and everything, they don't have any really useful application. So all these improvements on the laws of nature at a cosmological level, the relativity of time, at a subatomic level, how particles move, that's why Newtonian mechanics isn't overthrown. They're improvements upon Newton, but they don't really impinge on our daily lives in any useful way. And I think she explains that and lays that out really, really well. Every time we solve a problem, it becomes more difficult to change anything about today's theories without re-problematizing issues that we've already resolved. And so the fundamental laws of nature we now have seem unavoidable consequences of past achievements. This inescapability of the existing theories is often referred to as rigidity. It raises our hopes that we already know everything necessary to find a more fundamental theory, and that being smart will be sufficient to find it. One way to look at this situation is to say that rigidity is desirable because it signals to theory as close to uniquely fitting our observations. The other way to look at it is that rigidity means we have reached a dead end, must revisit long-solved problems and look for the path not taken, which is what I refer to as the paradigmatic shift, which is not really what scientists are up to. And finally, just to sort of reaffirm this notion of human scale. This separation of scales has far-reaching consequences. It means that we can devise approximate laws of nature that to good accuracy describe a system at some given resolution, and then revise these laws as we increase or decrease the resolution. The approximate laws, which are good only at a certain resolution, are called effective laws. So, I love this book. It's absolutely 5 stars for me. She's a really good writer. She's quite, as I say, she's quite punchy, she's quite chippy. Clearly she's suffering a crisis of faith in her own, everything that she's done up till now in her professional life. So this was terrific. So 2 really, really good reads. As I say, whether that can be classified, classed as non-fiction, I don't think it can. It says non-fiction, Penguin non-fiction on the back, but I disagree. I think this is his version of a David Markson novel that is not a novel. And Sabine Hossenfelder, Lost in Maths. So a really good reading week for me. Till next time, thanks very much.